But let's go through the papers now. Actually, quite a busy set of papers, considering we're a week out until Christmas. Nicholas Owen, the former BBC News presenter, joins me now. Nicholas, lovely to see you. Loving the
Morning.
tie.
Well, it's Christmas. It's
suitably bright and festive. Right, let's talk about the Italian job that's been going on this weekend. We've had the Prime Minister meeting with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni. Interesting relationship that they've struck up, those two.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it seems to be there are quite a few examples. We're talking later on about Lord Cameron and the German lady and so on. People getting, you might say, slightly different political perspectives in general, but here we have very much a meeting of minds. Sunak using some really strong language now about immigration overwhelming our country altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, these are deep worries that a lot of people will have. And the Italian lady, Giorgia Meloni, she's said it very clearly in Italy, and it's gone down, generally speaking, very well there. A more difficult thing to get over in this country, I would say. But fascinating, as you say, the two of them coming together.
The dynamic between them, because obviously he's associated with being more of a centrist. She's considered very right-wing, and some on the left, you know, sort of say that she's sort of aligned with Mussolini's values, which might be overstating it. However, I just think that's an interesting dynamic. And as you say, the language he's using, hostile states using migration to destabilise the West, was part of his speech yesterday. He's getting tough on it in the rhetoric, but will the Rwanda bill go the distance, do you think, Nicholas?
Well, I just think this Rwanda, it's impossible to get away from the word Rwanda altogether, isn't it? What is it? Is it a country which is sunny uplands? People can go there and have a better life. Why do most migrants come to this country? Why do most people risk their time in boats and other things to come here? I don't think it's to come here and be sort of live off the state and things. People want a better life, don't they? And they're going to get a better life in a country like Rwanda. And here's the big catch, of course. If the general election next year goes the way that everybody seems to think it will, and nothing's for certain in this life, but bookies say it's 90% chance that it's going to be Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, are they going to unwind it?
Yes.
So are people going to end up in Rwanda, a few people on the first plane, and they're going to come smartly back?
I know, I'm going to be asking where streeting that, actually, because I can't quite work out if they axe the Rwanda plan and there are people in Rwanda, what actually happens to them. Let's have a quick word on Rishi Sunak's helicopter. Interesting story in the Sunday Times. Tell me about it, Nicholas.
Well, I take a bit of a view on this. He does bash around in these helicopters. Can't quite remember out of which budget it comes, but it's something like £8 million a year to make sure that the Prime Minister can hop easily from place to place. OK, because you're the leader of the country, you do need to make moves pretty quickly. But there was a plan, apparently, to scrap that. I don't quite know what the alternatives are going to be, but something cheaper was on the way. But it's been revealed, and I think it's something to do like the RAF's House newspaper casually mentioned that it was all going to be changed. There was going to be some sort of economy measure taken. And it was the Prime Minister himself who insisted, no, I want my helicopter, please.
That's interesting.
And I just think, again, it's this messages business. When so many people are struggling, we don't need to... Well, perhaps we should keep repeating that. It just looks bad. It's bad PR.
It's not great optics. Also, it's similarly bad as the optics of him and, indeed, the King and others all taking separate private jets to COP28, which I thought was a bit of an irony. Let's look at the Labour situation when it comes to immigration and what they're saying about Rwanda. There's quite a cheeky story in the Mail on Sunday about a Labour candidate who has been selling children's holidays to the very part of the country that the party insists is unsafe for illegal migrants. So you've got Labour saying, we can't send anyone to Rwanda because it's not safe, and now they've selected somebody, I think, to run in Bishop Auckland at the next general election.
Sam Rushworth,
who has a company selling children's holidays out to Rwanda. So is it safe or isn't it? I mean, are the Labour Party flailing on this policy too?
Yeah, it is a bit ironic, isn't it? Yes. There's a strange thing, really. I'm sending children. I mustn't use those words, must I? We're getting into the migration talk, isn't it?
I mean, we say children. I think they're organising gap years.
Yeah, young people.
Teenagers.
Yes, exactly. Go and have experience in Africa. You know, local people, meet local people, see how other people live and so on. Sounds a lovely idea. But you know, Rwanda, hang on a minute, aren't the Labour Party sort of against the Rwanda plan? Well, are they or aren't they? I'm completely confused.
But they're having this policy of sort of being silent assassins and not saying very much about anything beyond sound bites. I mean, there's no substance necessarily to what they're proposing to stop the boats, but I think they can just remain silent and...
Well, we do keep saying this, don't we? Have we quoted him before, Napoleon? The films on, go and watch the film, but the best line from Napoleon was always, you know, when your enemy is making a mistake, do not interrupt him.
Exactly.
You know? I think...
it's a good policy so far because they're doing all right in the polls. Let's have a look at whether there has been a policy shift on Israel. The Sunday Times is quoting Cameron saying that it's time for a sustainable Gaza ceasefire. Let me just pull a quote out of his actual piece here. He's teamed up with his German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, and they claim they are focused on a three-pronged strategy. First, they support Israel's right to defend itself, but warn, and I quote, the Israeli government should do more to discriminate sufficiently between terrorists and civilians, ensuring its campaign is targeted on Hamas leaders and operatives. Is this the Foreign Secretary saying that he doesn't think that Israel are being proportionate? This does seem to mark a bit of a shift, I think.
I think it does, yes. I mean, first of all, going back to what we were saying right at the beginning, was a strange alliance here, in a way, between Lord Cameron, David Cameron, Prime Minister, sort of centrist, but basically conservative, slightly in the right wing, and this lady, her name...
Yes, Baerbock.
Yes, from Germany. Green Party, but they do seem to represent these two disparate strands coming together to say that there's got to be sustainable ceasefires and all this sort of thing. I just think it's all very well to talk like this, isn't it? But Israel, in Benjamin Netanyahu and the people who support him and the IDF, absolutely determined to root out Hamas. And the only way they see of doing that is to be, frankly, incredibly brutal. There's no other way of putting it, is it? And let's not forget what happened to those three hostages who came out waving white flags.
Yeah, there was friendly fire and they were gunned down, unfortunately.
How you get... It's easy to talk in these terms about slowing down, you know, having more, trying not to prevent it, trying not to have any more civilian casualties. It seems to me an almost impossible thing to resolve, absolutely impossible thing. But in the background, there are whispers that there's a new deal on the way involving the Qataris, inevitably always seem to be the referees in these things. Some talk that the security chief from Mossad, the chap here in the Israeli Secret Service, basically, be meeting the Qatari somewhere in Europe. It's always in these rather vague terms. So perhaps something new will be coming out. Perhaps there can be some way to pause
it. This seems to be...
It seems to me to be...
Might be wishful thinking.
Very, very wishful thinking.
I mean, also, another shift that we've seen is this military strike that's covered in the Sunday Express and all of the papers, but it's on page 11 of the Express, saying Navy strikes down attack drone. I mean, that seems to mark somewhat of an escalation. I don't think that we have... taken down a drone like this in a decade. I
don't think the Navy's fired a shot in anger for about 10, 11 years, something like that. But the Americans have. The Americans have been doing quite a lot. This is the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who, they're very, very similar to Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're all proxies for Iran. That's the point. The Houthis have been attacking ships and threatening shipping in the Red Sea. Do you know, I think, honestly, Camilla, I think people have rather not taking their eye off the ball on this one. That's an absolutely critical trade route for the whole world. And if these Houthi rebels really start threatening in the way that they are, some of the big shipping lines, Maersk and all these others, have actually stopped sailings. This is absolutely...
It's a really worrying development, actually.
Very, very worrying situation. But isn't it interesting? A point I'm not sure I've made here on GB News before, but what do we actually see people like Iran doing? Only acting through these third parties.
Yes.
No direct support for Hamas in any shape or form, whatever. I think that is the most fascinating thing in the background.
And also increasing numbers of Iranians trying to sort of fight back against the Ayatollah and some of the mullahs because they're not happy with the way that Iran is going and the murder of the schoolgirl with the hijab and everything else going on. You know, the Iranian resistant movement in the background is clearly putting a lot of pressure on Iran in general. A final word, Nicholas, as a former BBC man, about Oliver Dowden, who's coming up on the show momentarily, talking about the BBC being doomsters and saying that some of the Conservative Party's woes have been caused by the national broadcaster. He also makes a point and has a little dig at Gary Lineker. Briefly, Nicholas, what's your view on that?
Well, I've been here before to say that Gary Lineker, I think, was wrong. I said that a long time ago. You and I had this conversation.
Yes, you keep on saying that. Lineker doesn't seem to be listening, funny enough. I mean, we've even got the BBC chairman saying he's wrong, but there we go.
Exactly. Perhaps the new boss of the BBC will slap him down. Well, Oliver Dowden, I'm sorry, sir. The fact is, most people think that it's time for you to go, your party, and I do not think we can blame the BBC for that. I am awfully sorry. No.
And do you think, by the way, that Lineker needs to be further disciplined? I mean, there's people calling for him to go. There's even a warning from the Tories saying, in the run-up to the general election, we can't have you opining any further, because last week he made an attack on Grant Shapps quite personal. And I think it's one thing to talk about policy, but quite another to kind of lampoon politicians on social media if you're working for the BBC.
I think it's ridiculous. I can't help feeling that Gary Lineker knows he's in an incredibly strong position, because if the BBC should actually turn around and say, you have broken your contract, it's the end for you on the BBC. He doesn't need to worry, does he? I mean, lots of other people, lots of other broadcasters, no doubt, particularly in the sporting world, would love to have Gary Lineker. So he might
also,
think he's
there's lots of sports presenters that would love to have Gary Lineker's job.
Indeed.
So if he moved from Match of the Day and went somewhere else, I mean, it just seems to be an ongoing problem that the BBC can't seem to solve.
No. Poor old Beeb.
Poor old Beeb. Well, anyway, we don't want to talk about the BBC because, of course, we have all views here on GB News, Lineker-esque or the complete polar opposite, and that's why we can speak freely on the People's Channel. Nicholas Owen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.